I got to come up with a new intro video.
What's the matter with you? Where's my face in that intro video? Where am I?
You are insufficiently credited in that intro video.
There we go.
Honestly, I didn't think of it till just now.
Of course not.
So
How are you?
We will fix that. I'm doing okay.
I heard you had some needles in your eyeballs.
I got stabbed in the face repeatedly yesterday. Yes, so it's all fine now. You probably can't see it. This thing, even when it was still there, it didn't show up very well on camera. But if you were like talking to me in person and I wasn't wearing my glasses, you'd be like, Jesus Christ, this guy's got a giant growth on his face. Holy cow. So I'm glad it's gone. And I'm glad to never have to have a doctor sticking needles in my eyes anymore. That'd be cool to not have that.
Hey, Trevor, Matt, and Stephen, and Richard, and Matt, and Hethwill.
All right. Yep. So, hey, hi to everybody who is watching so far. We got 19 viewers already. I got the social media posts out because I actually prepared 5 minutes before the show this time. So welcome, everybody. Tonight, we are talking about Legends of Wargaming, and I kind of picked the title just so I could talk about, early days of commercial tabletop war games in the 60s and 70s. And we can pick this story up at some later time, wherever we decide we're leaving it off. So, but I wanted to, talk about, the roots of wargaming obviously go back many centuries, right, to abstract strategy games like chess and go and Hnaffle and Viking chess and the great game of that Irving Finkel keeps doing YouTube videos about. Those are super abstract. I personally am not all that interested in abstract strategy games, except in the abstract. But the roots of what we think of as wargaming now, at least inside the hobby, it come from, Baron von Reiswitz and the Kriegspiels. And there were other Kriegspiel movements that we weren't called Kriegspiels at the time, but that we would call Kriegspiels today, that were professional military simulations to some extent, designed to either teach strategy or illustrate strategy or experiment with strategies to see what worked.
Artie,
yes,
would you call Mahjong a war game?
No, I'd call it an abstract strategy game, but I wouldn't call chess or go a war game either. Some people would, and I'm not really inclined to argue with that. But I mean, I don't think so. I think they're abstract strategy games. Is Blockus a war game? It's just as much a war game as Go is.
In chess, you do have the knight.
Well, yeah, there's a military theme, but lots of games have a military theme without necessarily being. U-Boat would be a classic example of games that have a military theme while simultaneously not being a war game, according to me.
Right. I think I'm beginning to understand the difference. The differences.
I'm beginning to understand this level of bullshit. But that aside, that's not my intention to get into that. The idea is just kind of to illustrate the things that the hobby grows out of. And then, of course, we've got quite a bit closer to us, actually. I guess about evenly spaced, thinking about it, is H.G. Wells' Little Wars, right?
Yeah.
Which is a literal set of miniatures rules developed by H.G. Wells back in 1900, I forget when exactly it was released. It was early 1900s rather than late 1800s, I'm pretty sure. And then, of course, that illustrates the division inside wargaming between, there's two divisions on the one hand. On the one hand, you have the division between board wargaming, which really didn't take off until the 60s, right? And miniature gaming, which has been around since before H.G. Wells. And then you have another division that is the hobby wargamers versus the professional wargamers, which is an interface that, say, the Armchair Dragoon spends a lot of time in because they happen to know a lot of people that work for places like the Center for Naval Analysis and the Army War College and stuff like that.
So, Artie, when you say professional, you're talking about Army, Air Force, stuff like that.
Yes, stuff that if not developed explicitly for actual militaries, is developed with actual militaries in mind. And of course, we have another division too between analog games and digital games, that is something that has emerged much more recently. I've expressed my dissatisfaction with most digital war games. That's, you know, largely me. There's certainly some good ones, but there's a lot of them that I just find unsatisfying.
Hey, how come MMP never got into that, man?
What, digital war games?
Yeah.
That's not a question for me, right? That is a question for the heads of MMP. So that's a thing that we have seen in the last few years, more than just a couple, but because there's been irons in the fire for a while. That several publishers have made inroads in, right? Lock and Load Publishing has a digital version of Lock and Load Tactical now. There's the Decision Games has had video game versions of several of their games. Matrix Games, the computer game company, has done digital versions of a variety of analog games, including things like Le Grand Guerre, which is their version of Le Grand Guerre is not called Le Grand Guerre. But they have an Empires in Arms, for example, that is Empires in Arms. And they have a World in Flames that is World in Flames. Decision has done some stuff with RAF and with War in Europe.
Have you ever seen it? Have you ever seen the RAF?
The computer games? Yeah, I've seen it on the table at their booth at Origin.
No, I'm talking about like on the computer screen.
Nope. Have not. It'd be worth looking for. I mean, even some relatively crazy stuff's got YouTube videos about it. So if that is something you could look up on YouTube.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing that.
Certainly, if you'll try and find War in Europe, I think you'll find nothing on that. But and then, of course, GMT's got digital versions of a number of their more popular crossover-y type games like Twilight Struggle and Labyrinth. Academy Games has at least one or two that I'm aware of. They have 1775, whatever the American Revolution game is called, which is a very good game. I've played the tabletop. I've played both, actually. I've played the tabletop version and the digital version. And it's, you know, it's a very good rendition of the tabletop version. So we've got that sort of the three different axes of wargaming, right? Where we have digital versus analog, minis versus tabletop, you know, war games versus U-boat, and professional versus amateur. Because we're all ultimately amateurs unless we're getting paid to do this, right?
You know, I keep saying this, but I always think that Academy Games is rinky-dink for you.
For what do you mean, rinky-dink?
Like, you know, too basic.
So as a war gamer, I like a lot of their designs as designs. As a war gamer, most of their war games are not where my tastes are.
But you seem to play a lot of them.
Their non-war games are super appealing. Which ones?
You seem to play a lot of their war games.
Academy? Not really, no.
Well,
I've played, I think, 4 of their games total. And I've liked them all, right? So it's not that I don't like them. It's just that a lot of their same thing with Lock and Load. A lot of their output doesn't align well with my tastes. That's all it is. From Academy, I think the strongest offering I've seen from Academy is Freedom, which is not a war game and is not, I mean, maybe to somebody it's a war game, but I don't think so. But it's wonderful. It's an amazing, informative, educational game that I learned a ton just playing. I thought it was about William Wallace. I was very mystified. What do you mean it's about the Underground Railroad? So people said, "Hey, want to play Freedom?" I was not prepared for the depressing thing that was, and it was, right. But you said a lot. It's super valuable for me to have played that game.
God, does your feed suck, man?
Yeah, sorry about that. We're trying to work our way through it. We had some issues last night as well. Not last night. Last night I was recovering, but we had some issues on Monday too.
Yeah, you're not even wearing an eye patch.
No, we have. You know, I obviously didn't plan this properly, because if I had planned it, I'd have had an eye patch and I'd have made a big spectacle about it. You know, pull out my glass eye, and so I'd done some kind of crazy stunt. But I'm not that good at this. So instead, I just got a tiny red spot on my face.
You know who was a wicked advocate of miniature wargaming? Peter Cushing.
Peter Cushing. Yep. Seen that.
Oh, shit. Okay.
Yep. Hey, you know, good for him. It's not that weird, actually. Miniatures. the miniature side of the hobby, I think, had, I mean, it was considered kind of dorky, I'm sure, but you know, that's same as people. That's not weirder than people building model railroads or something like that, right?
Yeah. You're right. You're right.
So, anyway, the idea was supposedly, what is the topic? The topic
Legends
was,
of Wargaming.
We're getting to the topic, right? So,
Legends.
You know, wargaming, and in the UK, when you say the word wargaming, a lot of what people picture in their heads is still miniatures, right?
Yeah.
Commercial tabletop war games get started in the early 60s with Avalon Hill, which is the Avalon Game Company at first, actually, I think. Of course, Charlie Roberts designed the first couple of games. The first actual historical game from Avalon Hill, at least, was Gettysburg. The 58 actually was released in 58.
That was his first game?
Tactics. Tactics 1 was the first game from them. And then they did a Tactics 2 somewhat later. And a lot of those 60s games that were released up to the end of, say, the 60s. I mean, there's really not a lot of publishers in the space, of the war game space, in the 50s, obviously, but in the 60s. There's some very early, those American Heritage games from Milton Bradley, for example. Those are kind of in the war game space. Other than that, odds and ends here and there. I think Rand actually had been doing stuff as early as the late 60s, maybe even earlier than that. But otherwise, as far as the market goes, it was Avalon Hill pretty much. And some of those games are pretty memorable, but not a lot of them hold up well today, I don't think.
Well, I was talking to Carl. My God, I forget his last name. He's a War Game Boot Camp. Carl Krieger.
Carl Krieger.
Krieger, yeah, that's right. And a lot of these games, it's easy to say they're outdated, and yes, they are outdated, but it's the CRT, man. Nobody wants the CRT anymore, really. Well,
so the CRTs, and we could do a whole show on this, by the way. I have not done the research to do a whole show on this, but you could do a whole show on the CRT. So Avalon Hill literally had a stock CRT that they used for 20 games, right? And remember, they only released one game a year for a long time. They were released for years and years and years. They used this stock CRT that they would just drop into whatever it was. Core, boom, stock CRT. Bulge, boom, stock CRT. Gettysburg, whichever version of Gettysburg they did in the 60s. I'm not sure that used the same CRT, but a lot of their stuff used that same CRT, right? There's a lot of different ways to do combat mechanics other than having a CRT. The obvious one I can think of is the fistful of dice system that's used by a bunch of Columbia games, where you roll a bunch of dice and every die that comes up with a certain number is a hit. And then maybe you have an armor or mitigation value or something like that on the defender's side to take off those successes, something like that. No CRT involved, no combat table of any kind. There's also differential tables. A lot of games that you don't see CRTs with that look like odds-based CRTs are tactical games where you have more of a firepower differential thing. In Panzer Blitz is like that. ASL, you have a firepower value. It depends. It's a different table depending on what you're shooting, but you have a firepower value, and you just roll against that firepower. And there are defensive modifiers, but you're not rolling. You're not computing odds or anything until you get to close combat, where you compute odds, right? So
but we were talking also about it changes the tactics of a game, because you're trying to amass the most amount of whatever numbers in your favor for a certain skirmish or something, Now it's strategy has changed, hasn't it? Because of the lack of CRTs.
There's still plenty of games that get released with an so there's odds-based CRTs, which is probably what you mean, and there are other types of CRTs, right? So CRTs is combat resolution table. There's a bunch of different ways to do that. The odds-based CRT was definitely the most popular for a long time. We still see plenty of games with odds-based CRTs. So every year, all those Mark Simonich games, well, all the World War II ones anyway, all have an odds-based CRT. But Simonich does some interesting things in there. He limits the number of factors that you can apply, which means that at least once you get the hang of it, you can kind of stop counting the factors after a while. Many designers have sort of thought or sought to mitigate that sort of player mental arithmetic where you're calculating odds to the last factor That's Mark Simonowicz's approach at it, and you're dealing more with column shifts for things like troop quality or armor or things like that.
So he's thinking ease of play.
Sure. Well, people are used to CRTs too, right? So Dean Essig has, of course, has the rounding rule that's different, and there are some other war games that use the straight math rounding rule, where if it's 0.5, you round up. If it's less than 0.5, you round down. Most games don't do that. Most games is just round in favor of the defender. Dean's games, you round mathematically. I think that intent is to mitigate factor counting. I'm not sure it's effective at that, but it to some extent, it's another one of those things. You once you get used to it, it works fine. But there are some war games that use percentile dice. Off the top of my head, Gauss uses percentile. Pull up John's comment here because we lost the cool comment stream on the side of the thing there until we figure out how to do that in StreamYard. I'm not paying Restream anymore. That was the only really awesome feature that I will miss. Gauss uses percentile dice. There are a few other ones too. A lot of times they refer to it as 2d10 because they've never played a role-playing game apparently, but what they really mean is percentile. You've also got the weird D66. It's not that weird actually. D66 mechanic where it's just like percentile, except it's 60. It's 11 to 66. One D6 is 10s and one D6 is ones. And a bunch of games use that as well. So ASL does have the Iggy Critical mentions the incremental infantry fire table. There are people that like it. I am not among its many fans. I see why some people like it because it makes every factor make a difference. But all it really does is just move the math somewhere else, right? It moves the math into the table rather than you figuring out that you have to round down to the nearest firepower value. That's really all it does. Daniel points out that MBT, which I've never played, uses percentile dice, which definitely suggests that Panzer must as well, since MBT is a derivative of the Panzer system as far as I could tell. This is a good one.
Yeah.
Advanced Squad Leader.
I guess he's not a fan.
Oh dear. I don't know about that. I think it's a pretty good idea. I think it's pretty good branding. So yeah, like I said, we had a power outage. I think it was the power outage that borked up our internet for a while. So I'm gonna reset the modem again once my wife's done working for the day.
So legends.
Charlie Roberts is the first legend of analog board wargaming. The next one comes along. I mean, you probably can put Tom Shaw in here too, who ran Avalon Hill for quite a while.
Okay.
After Charlie left for a long time. Did some designs as well, but his designs, I mean, the film design he's most famous for is the Avalon Hill Kriegspiel, which is a notorious disaster. Next in line, I think, comes Jim Dunnigan, who pops in, I think, in about 69 or 70, starting SPI, which started as a company to publish Strategy and Tactics magazine, which SPI did not found. It was started by Chris Wagner, who was a staff sergeant, I think, in the Air Force stationed in Japan, publishing this magazine, and subscriptions or sales or whatever measure they were using, money coming in, were plateaued. So Dunnigan bought it notoriously for, I think, $5, and then he didn't actually give Chris Wagner the $5 for like several years.
Seriously.
But like immediately they retooled the magazine and started putting an issue, a game in every issue, and since that day, every issue of S&T has contained a game. I think their first was S&T number like 16. The first game was Crete, and then for the first several games they were on they were paper counters, paper maps obviously, but I mean they're still paper maps, but the counters were paper too. So you had
didn't S&T scratch out Modern War?
So Modern War didn't get started till
no. I'm talking about isn't it defunct?
So as of several months ago, there were 3 magazines being published before, actually, by Strategy and Tactics.
Right.
Strategy and Tactics, which is still around. The World at War, which is all World War II, which is still around, and Modern War, which has run for about 80 issues, something like that. That's a good 10 years, right? Actually, I'm not sure what the publication schedule is, so I don't know how long that is. But it ran for quite a while, and I guess the subscription numbers just weren't that high. They also have started Strategy and Tactics Quarterly, which is just a magazine. The other 3 have games in them. So Modern War was recently canceled.
Right.
Yes. So the other 2 magazines seem to be fine. And based on the circulation numbers that I've seen, there's a big caveat in here. The circulation numbers now are roughly on par of what they were in 1980 when SPI was running the magazine. The difference is that now there's a newsstand version that's just the magazine and not the game. And I'm guessing the vast majority of their magazine sales are without the game, right? You can go to Barnes and Noble and buy S&T.
Right, right. I would think the opposite. Like, people would rather have the game.
I mean, I would. But I'll pick up S&Ts with, like, even old S&Ts. I'll pick up the magazine with no game. I just won't pay more than about $1.50 or $2 for it. I have no idea if this is true. I wouldn't be stunned if that was the case. I also wouldn't be stunned if the opposite was the case. I don't know that. I didn't mean legendary tales so much as I meant legendary people or companies or games. So I cannot comment on this. I have no idea. And no, this is not connected at all. And the Rand Corporation has been around since the 40s or 50s, by the way. So, yeah, but these were the S&T specials. These weren't like part of the number sequence of S&Ts. Jeff's right about this. Those did exist. But that's because TSR was trying to figure out what the hell to do with this company that they just inherited, and everybody quit. So... the last person left from SPI was David James Ritchie, who hung around TSR for a while and had done some D&D stuff. So the late David James Ritchie, I might add. So,
would you consider Steve Jackson a legend?
In wargaming terms, no. But so hold on a second. I just unplugged myself. Yeah, I know, but in wargaming terms, I mean, Nick Karp's got, wargame. I wouldn't put Nick in that category just because he a relatively modest number of titles, right? Steve's a special case, right? So first of all, there are 2 Steve Jacksons. There's British Steve Jackson and American Steve Jackson.
Yeah, the
British Steve Jackson is one of the original founders of Games Workshop. American Steve Jackson is the guy running Steve Jackson Games. Okay, I think of Steve Jackson Games as primarily a company that does role-playing stuff because that is almost overwhelmingly what I have bought from Steve Jackson. But he did, back to the days of metagaming, he did plenty of games that would be considered war games, right? Well, yeah. Like Ogre, like Raid on Iran, all kinds of stuff. There's a
one-page bulge.
Yeah, there you go. That's true too. I forgot about that. Yeah, but yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. And in terms of stature, I don't know that I think Steve is necessarily that important a figure to wargaming. Well, but in terms of overall hobby gaming, yeah, I'd say Steve is in the top 10.
I mean, Ogre. I mean, how many people got turned on to war games because of Ogre?
Probably a decent number. But one thing that helped was Ogre cost like $1. It was more than that, but it was cheap, right? That was
$2.95.
Yeah. Oh, that you didn't buy that in like 1980 when it came out, though. I think it was like $2 at the time. It was really cheap. So, but anyway, they've been reprinting it. They just came out with a new edition of Car Wars that they kickstarted. Yeah. It comes in a box the size
a big box. Yeah, I know, man.
Yeah, I watched an unboxing of it. The unboxing took like an hour and 10 minutes. Because there's so much stuff in it.
Was it Bonacore, Stephen Bonacore?
I don't think so. I forget whose channel it was on, but it was a long unboxing. So, but yeah, I mean, Steve Jackson, in terms of pure, so somebody like Steve Jackson or Jim Dunnigan or Charlie Roberts are important not only as designers, although they're all important as designers, but as people that ran publishers, or in Steve's case, still run publishers, right?
Yeah.
Gary Gygax is another one. TSR did quite a few war games over the course of its life. In the wargaming context, unless we're talking about D&D, then I think Gary is more important a figure as somebody that's running a company, right? But there are designers that I think probably ought to be, you know, in those exalted ranks as well. Somebody like a Richard Berg, who did run a company for a while, but it was not a, you know, not a company that hung around or had a huge impact as a company. John Hill, for example, who is the designer, Car Wars squad leader.
John Hill.
There were pictures every year. They used to do like an Origins report with pictures and all kinds of stuff. This only happened for a few years, though. This wasn't like something that went on for decades or anything. It only would have happened in the first 7 years of Origins, because after that SPI went away.
Look at Trevor's comment, man.
Roger McGowan, absolutely. There are, I think, a relatively small number of artists that, as artists, warrant inclusion in this category. Roger is one of them. Rick Barber is one of them. I would say Redmond Simonson obviously goes without saying.
What about Charlie Keebler?
We are. So I was thinking about Atlantic Chase not that long ago. I was looking because I got a copy, right, and I'm looking through it. I'm like, you know, the way they've presented this game and like the way they've structured the teaching material and all the play aids and all the rules and all this other stuff is really innovative. It's seriously the biggest innovation in that space, like wargaming pedagogy, since Redmond Simonson, right? Remember, Redmond Simonson wrote like the literal Bible on how to present information in war games, right? And completely revolutionized like the physical presentation of stuff. Is that a Roger McGowan cover?
No, it's Redmond Simonson. It's the Panzer Blitz.
Okay, because I mean, Roger's obviously done so many iconic covers. You can't leave him out.
No, squad leader.
Rick Barber for maps. Probably Charlie Kibler for maps.
Yeah.
Considering like Charlie did like all the squad leader, and I don't know about squad leader, but the ASL maps are all by Charlie. He did all the great campaigns of the American Civil War maps, all except the ones that Rick Barber did from Grand Takes Command.
I love Rick Barber maps, man. Love them. Well,
fortunately, there's more of them in the pipeline than we feared when he passed. There are two. I don't know if I've mentioned this on a stream with you. There are two new Blind Swords Herman Lettman games on pre-order now from Revolution Games. One is on, I think, Wilson's Creek and First Bull Run. They both have Rick Barber maps.
Oh, okay. So, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's new news as of maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, something like that. For me, it kind of got buried in the fact that I was at Origins. So, but yeah, there's two new Blind Swords games coming. So that's good news. I'd be delighted to see more games in that series. I think it's a good series. You got to talk about the people that formed. So unlike, there's like a figure that sort of overwhelms everybody else around them in the early days of SPI. You know, Jim Dunnigan's kind of this big personality type guy. GDW is not like that. GDW gets started in, I think, 72, 73. And it's just like a bunch of guys who go to some university in Illinois. And they have, I forget the names, and I should have looked this up, and I met two, and we had crazy days. So, but Frank Chadwick's in that list. Mark Miller's in that list. Lauren Wiseman is in that list. I think Rich Banner was in that list as well.
Yeah, I mean, look at all these people.
And the number of like hugely impactful games that came out of that group is also really high. I mean, they never had the output of like an SPI, but they did a lot of really impactful games. Perfidious Albia, John Harshman. Yep, there was somebody else involved in that too.
What about? My God,
there's a whole bunch of people. So you know, let me get this out. There's a whole bunch of people doing Atlantic Chase playthroughs. Rough Swordsman Wargamers doing it. Some other people are doing it. There's plenty of playthrough content on Atlantic Chase.
What about Joseph Miranda?
Joe Miranda. Joe's still so active. It's hard to consider. It's easy to not consider Joe because he is a current figure, and so we unconsciously exclude him from this list of historical, individuals whose, great contributions were in the past. Joe Miranda is still contributing heavily to the wargaming hobby, as is Mark Herman.
Yeah, I was going to say, you don't have to be dead to be a legend. Mark Herman.
Well, I'm trying to work my way through it in pseudo-chronological order, at least. Now, there's a computer version of Struggle for the Galactic Empire as well. Honestly, I think Lou is noteworthy in the hobby for being Lou more than anything else, right? I mean, Lou has had his fingers in absolutely everything. He's done role-playing games. He's done miniatures games. He's done war games. He's been a dice manufacturer. He's been a distributor. He had his warehouse washed out into the Gulf of Mexico by Hurricane Hugo. I mean, there's the amount of story around Lou's hockey is just, incalculable, Crazy Igor, sure. I mean, as retailers go, I mean, when we talk about retailers, we're usually talking about companies rather than individuals. Crazy Igor comes to mind. Noble Knight is certainly the biggest.
Who's Crazy Igor?
Name in the space right now. He was the Noble Knight of his day. He retired maybe 10, 15 years ago, something like that. Yeah, so I mean, Gary designed a whole bunch of war games. Tractics was one that he designed, and I think that was published by
TSR?
Was it published by TSR? There was a predecessor company to TSR. It might have been published by Guidon Games, actually, which was Gary and Don Kay, who was one of the partners in TSR early on. I don't know. I don't want to leave Ben out, but Ben is too new to be considered in I think in the same category. But John Butterfield, absolutely. John Butterfield, legendary designs dating back into the SPI era to like this year. So
what about Alan Emmerich?
So I'd have to look at Alan's credits. I know Alan was one of the designers of the Total Krieg or Krieg series. Those are very good games. I mean, these guys are miniatures guys, and I don't mean to leave them out, but I'm less informed about the names of the legends of miniatures gaming than I am about board wargaming or RPGs. Right? You got Phil Barker too. That's probably ought to be in that category. So not that Phil Barker, the other Phil Barker. That's another one. So,
would you consider Chad Jensen?
I consider Chad a great designer. I think so. Would you consider what's a good movie that came out last year or this year, whatever? Right. Let's say I haven't seen a movie in the last year that came out like the movies. Let's say the Avengers Endgame. Is that a great movie? Or is it really kind of too recent to say whether it's a great movie?
I see what you're saying.
A lot of times you need the perspective of time, right? So the famous example that I brought up on this stream before is, Citizen Kane, right? Which is considered by film critics and film, program administrators to be one of the greatest things of all time.
It's
if you're going to make movies, you have to see it. Very influential, brilliant film, lost the Best Picture Oscar to How Green Was My Valley. So, the voters, right, who are primarily actors, decided How Green Was My Valley was the better picture that year. But that looks crazy now, right? Yeah. No one has seen. I've heard How Green Was My Valley is a good movie, but I mean,
you can't compare it to.
They're not even in the same league. No. I mean, it's like one is the Toledo Mud Hens of movies, and the other one is like the whatever year you want to pick, New York Yankees with Mickey Mantle. So there is a Adventure Gaming Hall of Fame that has a whole bunch of people in it, some of whom are important as wargame designers, and some of whom are important as role-playing designers, and some of whom are important as publishers and all kinds of stuff. That's true. Will's absolutely right. GW did this. Games Workshop did do board war games. That's absolutely true. Remember when they published a magazine too, and now that magazine is just Warhammer. So I mean, Games Workshop had their hands in all kinds of stuff. They did regular board games too. They did role-playing games. They had their fingers in every corner of the hobby at one point. I'm not sure they ever manufacture their own dice.
Trevor, Metropolis better than Citizen Kane. Different. I think it's apples and oranges here.
I agree with Dan on this. I think that's an apples and oranges. I don't think you can meaningfully compare a silent film to a talkie like that. That far into the talkies period.
Trevor, come on, get with it.
Not to say that although I'm going to say Nosferatu better than Metropolis, but that's just me.
Oh, that's a good
you can
one.
You can look up who's in the Hall of Fame. It's on Wikipedia. Stigler mentions S. Craig Taylor. S. Craig Taylor is one of the great unsung. He only had about 6 or 8 designs to his credit, but they're all fantastic, right? Wood Ships and Iron Man and Flat Top and some other really, really good games came from the typewriter of S. Craig Taylor. Don Turnbull. Yeah, so Don Turnbull ran TSR UK for a while, I believe. Was the editor for the Fiend Folio, which was largely D&D monsters that had appeared in the pages of White Dwarf, and then a bunch of monsters that appeared in various modules. So, yeah, absolutely. Oh, well, there you go. So, yes, absolutely, Don Turnbull. Didn't he pass away recently? Nuts about that?
Yeah, well, you didn't include it in the list. I asked you to include.
No, he's been gone from us for a long time, actually. So, Arthur Goodwin. I always see that name and think of Archie Goodwin, who was an old Marvel Comics individual.
You know something? We're just naming all North American people. There's no Europeans here.
Masahiro Yamazaki.
Would you consider him a legend?
I don't know, because I haven't experienced any of his games, but I'll tell you this: he's got a lot of designs, and a lot of them are really innovative. To the extent that they have not been understood well enough to be copied yet. Perfidious Albion mentioned Steve Cole. Steve, of course, is still active with Amarillo Design Bureau, or Amarillo, whatever it's called, that does Starfleet Battles. That still does Starfleet Battles.
What about Jim Crone? Would you consider Jim Crone?
I don't think Jim Crone's been designing long enough. I could be wrong. I'm willing to be proven wrong on anything. Certainly, Jim Crone is a designer I have my eye on what he's doing nowadays. But a bunch of these folks are, right? I mean, I'm paying attention to something like Jerry White. I want to know when Jerry White does a new game, right?
Yeah,
but, you're talking about Legends of Wargaming. I think you got to have a lengthy history there, and I don't know that these gentlemen do necessarily. So Jason W., I mean, yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, we could certainly say there's many, 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 many honorable mentions, and many people that I would, like an S. Craig Taylor, that I would say don't necessarily get listed when you think of like the top 5 figures, or whatever arbitrary line you cut off. You're going to leave somebody out, right? You got to leave somebody out, unfortunately. So, the question is where you're going to draw the line.
Well, where do you draw the line? I mean, a name like Mark Herman, you're always going to hear about Mark Herman as much as you're going to hear of Charles S. Roberts. Sure. That's for sure.
Well, but what helps is that Mark is still working, right? So Mark's kind of has a visibility that somebody like a Joe Balkowski, who has been working this whole time, but not necessarily designing war games, might not have. And Joe is a fantastic designer as well, by the way, an incredible innovator. Or somebody like an Eric Lee Smith, who was out of the picture for a long time. And again, chit pull games, right? What we think of now as that, draw chit and activate some subset of units, that's an Eric Lee Smith thing, right? So when we say chit pull game, then if we have that standard chit pull model in our heads, then there's other variations of it. Then that all comes from Panzer Command, which was an Eric Lee Smith game. So Al has been around. Actually, Jim Dunnigan borrowed the money to start SPI from Al Nafi. So there's that. And Al doesn't have that many credits, though, as a designer. He's got a few, but not that many.
How do you know all this stuff?
Because I looked it up. Because I'm like, this Imperium Romanum is awesome. What else has this guy done? And Al's got like 4 or 5 other designer credits, but his is a name that's in like the credits of a lot of old SPI games, just not necessarily as the designer. Yeah, Charlie's still active. Roger's still active. Roger's very active on social media too, which certainly helps. Charlie, I've never seen Charlie show up on social media.
Yeah, I interviewed him.
Charlie Kibler?
Yeah.
You did? I got to check that out. I didn't know that.
Yeah, nice guy. Super nice guy.
Okay, well, that's what I've heard. But, I mean, I heard the name Charlie Kibler getting thrown around as, 30 years ago. So Hathwell, this is part of the reason why I picked this topic, because I want to get some of these names out there, and so, the names of some of the games that are attached to these names, sort of give them some extra visibility, or to sort of refresh people's memories as to why these things were great, right? Yeah, this is a thing that's I've always considered just weird. It's like I'm Facebook friends with Frank Chadwick, haha. It just seems surreal to me. I think I'm friends with Jack. Well, Jack Rady. Jack Green, I'm not sure. Al Nafi, no. But John Prados still around. John Prados has many legendary designs. That's absolutely true. John Prados was Rise and Fall of Third Reich. I mean, it's a hugely influential game right there. Definitely a name that stands out, and who has been active, maybe not really active, but who has kept a toe in the pool of wargaming this whole time.
Ted Racer, yeah,
definitely Ted. Yeah, I'd put Ted. Ted's been around since the Command Magazine days, right? I mean, there's a bunch of really good Ted Racer Command Magazine games, some of which are out again from GMT.
But yeah, Volko.
But that's not to say that Ted, Ted has a new game. The Deadly Woods, I think, is his latest. That's the Dark Valley chip pull system for the Battle of the Bulge.
He's very opinionated on Facebook, Ted Racer.
Yeah, I don't think I'm following Ted on Facebook. I'm following him on Twitter. Most of my social media presence is
Twitter.
Nobody's mentioned Volko. Yeah, but again, Volko's. I'm not sure Volko has a design before Wilderness War. Maybe he does, but that's relatively recent, right? Rachel Simmons, did 4 or 5 games, something like that. Not a huge resume, and retired now.
Yeah, so I want to ask something about Rachel Simmons. The Napoleonic game, why is it so revered?
I don't know. I haven't played it, but it's supposed to be really good, and it looks gorgeous.
I know, but it's $400.
Somebody had, I thought there was a revision coming down the pipe for that.
Hey, Trevor, listen to me. That Brian Train, is that enough for you? Huh? What about Canadian Simulations there? What was it called? Canadian
Simulations Canada, yeah.
Yeah. So what's he talking about?
Absolutely. A lot of those old StimCan games are coming out now as magazine games in a shiny new editions through Paper Wars too.
What about Carol Paradzi? Trevor, get out.
What about there's Columbia Games too, which is a Canadian company. I don't care where their office is; they're all Canadians. So there's that too. Okay. They're in Blaine, Washington, which is literally on the other side of the border. So Richard Borg, I wonder if Richard Borg has other credits besides the Commands and Colors games. I don't know. I haven't looked at that.
Hey, Dean Essig, of course.
Well, we did mention Dean already. I'm not going to leave Dean out of any Legends of Wargaming discussion. That's for sure. What's his name? Chris.
Yeah, Stephen Newberg.
Chris from Command Magazine. Chris Perello. Pretty important guy, has done a bunch of noteworthy designs himself, plus ran Command Magazine for a while. So I mean, we could literally list names all night, right?
Yeah.
So, which is it's kind of the fun of it. The point of this is not necessarily to say this was a big official list curated by the Pope that says you're our official Legend of Wargaming, sir. This is a discussion where we get people thinking about this. Gilbert Collins is also Canadian. You got Gilbert Collins, man. You guys need to shut up. And then there's some trying to think of UK designers of tabletop war games, and I know there are some.
Well,
I'm struggling to come up with any. Kim Kanger is like Swedish or Norwegian.
Yeah. He's up there. In the
so I mean, I can name some French folks. There's that guy, and there's that other guy. Stanislaw Thomas is French, for example. What's his name that spun off Jeu de Gloire out of Frederick Bay, that spun Jeu de Gloire out of the Richard Berg Triumph and Glory series.
What about that Polish guy who has Taktia and Strategia? He has tons of games, and the Polish military he's always pictured with the Polish military.
Okay.
Wojciech Zaluski.
Yeah, I'm not going to try to pronounce that guy's name.
Wojciech Zaluski.
Okay. Oh, no, that wasn't who I was thinking of. But yeah, there's the whole Azure Witch group that came out of that. That's a very influential French wargame publisher that their stuff's real hard to find here. Always has been. La Bataille, well, so this is a whole ball of wax here. Hold on. I'll tell you who I think designed La Bataille. And it's going to be the designer of the original La Bataille de la Moskva. And I know Frank Chadwick is one of them. So that's Frank Chadwick. And no, it's Rich Banner. And wait a minute. Lawrence A. Groves. This is what BGG says anyway. I do not have a copy of that anymore. So I thought Frank was involved in that at some point. I could be nuts. It's easy to just see GDW and assume Frank was involved.
What about Bruno Sinigalio, man?
Bruno doesn't have that many credits, right?
I know, but holy cow.
Credits, and if you're talking about the balls, Bruno is literally the guy. The actual man for the balls specifically. But he's got credits on one of the versions of Battle of the Bulge, one of the versions of Bitterwoods, the Siege of Jerusalem, and Time of Trumpets. That's last I checked. That's all Bruno's credits.
I mean, this guy is
Philippe Thibault. That's who I'm thinking of.
He's the authority on the Bulge. That's
one of the folks from Azure Witch. Oh yeah, he's Bruno's probably the greatest living authority on the Battle of the Bulge.
Yeah, I would say. Well, from what I know, which is nothing.
Yeah. So Gilbert. That's a good question, Gilbert. So let's just mention this. Gilbert has a YouTube channel, which is a fabulous YouTube channel.
And he's from Ontario, Canada.
And he's Canadian. And so he's super nice. And he is the designer of Mr. Madison's War and the upcoming War for America, which should be coming from Compass. I think we're saying Q1 now. I could be misremembering that. I hope I'm wrong. I want that game. That's going to be a super interesting game.
And it's World War I naval game.
No, it's Rev War. American Revolution.
Oh, all right.
World War I naval was that you might be thinking of Empire at Sunrise that I just picked up. But
no, Stigler. I don't think Bruno. No, Bruno did not fight, but a lot of his uncles, I think his dad or something, they were there, man. Yeah.
So yeah. So I mean, I had a great uncle that was there too, actually. Great uncle. Yeah, that's right. But yeah, I mean, so we could list these names all night. The point of the exercise is to get these names back out in front of people again. The names that we've all heard. We got to start with the names like Charlie Roberts, Jim Dunnigan, Mark Harmon, and John Hill, maybe, and stuff like that. But then you want to get further into the weeds of, or I wanted to, older designers. John Butterfield has a bunch of really good designs from this like late 70s and early 80s. I don't know about late 70s, but definitely early 80s.
It was a joke. It was a joke.
He was kidding, I think.
Stigler. He never kids Stigler.
He's a very serious young man. So, but and guys like Nick Karp and Craig Taylor and even people like Joe Belkowski, right? So Joe is like the official military historian of the U.S. 29th Infantry Division. So he's written like this multi-book epic history of the 29th Infantry Division from the day they landed on D-Day to pretty much till the end of the war. It's 5 or 6 books or something like that. And he is, you know, a huge authority on D-Day in general, and especially the 29th Infantry side of things. Mark McLaughlin's good catch too, actually. But you know, during that time, he was like not doing war games. Well, Joe just came back to us and released Hood Strikes North through MMP, which is a return to the great campaigns of the American Civil War series that he started back in the Avalon Hill days with Stonewall Jackson's Way.
Gorgeous box covers, gorgeous art.
Oh, the maps are
gorgeous.
As well, they're really good looking box covers too. Mark McLaughlin, definitely some epic classic designs from Mark, and he's still around too. He's, you know, done games recently through GMT. He's got a series of novels set in the time of Alexander the Great. He's got a whole bunch of stuff in the pipeline yet. E4 Airman, school and me, because I should have thought to mention Kevin Zucker, actually, who is kind of, you know, the man of Napoleonics in general, at least at the grand tactical scale, and probably at the operational scale too. There's not that many operational.
Isn't he a UK guy?
Kevin? No, he lives in Maryland.
Maryland.
Yeah. So I assume he's Maryland. I don't know. I assume he's got a YouTube channel, actually. I've seen. He's definitely American. So, and you know, he released games through Avalon Hill. So offhand, we got War and Pieces of Mark McLaughlin, by the way. Struggle of Nations is one of Kevin's, and 1809 from Victory Games, which is both of which are in the operational Napoleonics space.
Artie, are you a fan of War and Pieces?
War and Pieces, the podcast,
or
the game?
The game.
Yeah, absolutely. I bought the new one. Actually, I got 2 copies of War and Peace. I got the old one right here, and I got the giant new one from One Small Step right here. So yeah, I liked it enough to spend $120 or whatever it cost on the new shiny one. So
what are you gonna do with the old one?
I don't know. I probably ought to dump it, or at least put it in storage. I don't really want to get rid of it, to be honest. I really don't want to get rid of any Avalon Hill games at this point. There's too many games that I want yet from Avalon. It's really not that many. There's about a half a dozen games I really would like to get that are Avalon Hill games. And then there's a few more that I will grab if I see them for a price I like. Jeff Beeler mentions, yes, please do not forget to like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. Please subscribe to Dan's channel, which a link is in the video description. So
look at Jason. Yeah, exactly.
So there's not that many games that have that level of continuity in the wargaming space, right? The only one really is ASL. Okay. But if you start to stretch that definition just a little bit, you start to pick up other things like Washington's War, which I recently just picked up, for example.
Well, how old is Twilight?
A revision. What's that?
How old is Twilight Struggle?
10 years, 12 years, 15 years.
Oh,
like
not
that.
more than that?
No. It's,
okay.
But I can't spell. But Washington's War is Twilight Struggle 2005 is a revision of We the People, which is I think a 93 game. I am right. It is a 1993 game. So right there is your pretty close to 30 years going on there. But that's not 30 straight years, right? There was a big space in there when it was out of print. The same thing applies to For the People, which is a less revised Mark Herman masterpiece that is still in print again, right? Even like Empire of the Sun has not been in print. That's about a 2005 game as well. That hasn't been in print for 30 years. There's 30 years goes back to, think about this, 1990. So only when we start talking about, there's very little, right? The only thing I could think of been in print this entire time is Diplomacy, actually. It's one of the first things that Hasbro did. Avalon Hill didn't originate with Avalon Hill. I forget who they picked it up from. But it was in print the entire time under Avalon Hill. It was one of the first things that Hasbro did when they bought Avalon Hill, was do a new version of Diplomacy. And Acquire was another one, but Acquire's not a word.
Yeah, Yo Geezer, James Dunnigan has been mentioned.
You could we talked for like 15 minutes just about Jim Dunnigan, actually. So
yeah, I was going to say, Quinto, Jim Days. Would you consider that still in print, Jim Days, because the 4th expansion is coming out?
Well, that's a good catch, actually. Well, so it's the same type of thing where, yeah, it's an older game that came back, but there's a lot of older games that came back. There's a big gap there where it was not generally available except on a secondary market. And James Day's Panzer Armor and 88 series from Yaquinto is a classic series, and got a lot of new fans when GMT redid it. And there's more to it now than there ever was in the Yaquinto years. So yeah, so this is another good question, right? How many of these games are actually being played? I'm going to say Panzer Blitz was a huge, influential game for a long time. It was like the best-selling war game of all time. Hugely influential game. I don't really think it's getting played that much now. I mean, are there people playing it here and there? Yes, there are. But I don't really think it's... I think a lot of the wind of Panzer Blitz got sucked out by Squad Leader.
And Panzer Blitz was like 350,000 copies.
Yeah, hundreds of thousands of copies.
That's insane.
Absolutely unheard of numbers nowadays.
Unheard of.
Possible exception of Twilight Struggle. Possible.
Really?
Yeah, I don't think they've hit 300,000, but they print like 20, 30,000 at a time, I believe.
Holy cow!
So, hey, Hannibal Rome versus Carthage. Just a great game, actually. This is a Mark Simonich game that was an Avalon Hill title, was very well regarded, was unavailable for a long time. We can do a whole show about old stuff coming back now under a variety of different publishers.
That's good. I like that.
I'm fine with that. I would just assume so the big picking grounds for this trend has been victory games. And I am very happy that we are getting new versions of victory games because in many cases the games were interesting or good, and in every case the components were garbage. So by modern standards, right? I mean, Hell's Highway, those counters are garbage. I don't know who's New England Simulations is bringing back Hell's Highway with John Butterfield. So yeah, I mean, I'm cool with that. I would love to see these games come back at a nice format. Modded maps would be nice, I guess, but I don't care too much. Readable counters is really important, man.
Yeah. Hey, John.
So this is another one that's been Stonewall Jackson's Way was about 93.
Is this an Avalon Hill?
Stonewall Jackson's Way was 92, so that's pushing 30 years as well. It spent a long time out of print after Avalon Hill went away before MMP brought it back. And then even after MMP brought it back, after it sold out, it was out of print for a bunch of years before MMP brought it back again, because it's kind of an ideal stepping on place for the series. So that's, I think, why they brought it back. So yeah, I mean, there's still somebody on eBay selling new maps and replacement counters for Panzer Blitz.
Yeah.
One of the cool things about Panzer Blitz is it's totally generic. So you could, if you buy 10 sets of Panzer Blitz, you could put them all together and play like a whole core versus another whole core.
And he's got variation and variant counters.
Yeah. Yeah. Lair versus Grant is a Joe Balkowski design, as I recall, and it is you can see the evolution from Lee versus Grant to GCACW. It's not the same system, but it is a clear antecedent. So yeah, exactly. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can still totally do that. And one of the reasons you can do that is Panzer Blitz has like 4 pages of rules. So it's super easy to play. But at some point,
Cosmic Encounter.
Yeah, Cosmic Encounter is a classic game. If you ever get a chance to play it, it's one of those, you know, friendship destroying games.
Yeah, I hate that game.
It's a great game. It
Oh
really
my
is a
God.
great game.
You want to make
I don't think it's in the war game space, but I'm not willing to get in a fist fight over it either. So
I can't do that. I can't lie to you straight faced.
It's not as bad as Diplomacy in that respect, but it is, you know, there is a table flipping element to it. There were 2 tables of Diplomacy happening at Origins. I went over and talked to them. I'm like, okay, look, I want you guys to come. I want you guys to pose like you're having a fist fight and somebody's about to flip the table, and they laughed it off. So,
you know, I mean, there's judgment. There's character judgments in those games, man.
Oh, absolutely. That's why you played at a convention with people you're never going to see again. That's the whole point. This I disagree with. There's only really like 1X in Cosmic Encounter. There's really no 4X in it.
Yeah, it's so, you know, stab your neighbor in the back.
I can't really speak to this. I assume we're talking about the series from GMT here. My impression is different, but I haven't played any of them, so I can't really tell you. So don't share that opinion at this time. Hopefully, I'll be able to give you a more informed opinion at a later time.
So, Artie, our time is up, and your feed is better. What's going on?
Because our time is up. My wife's probably not on a conference call at work anymore. Is probably what the issue is. I got to reset the modem though too. So, but anyway, we are out of time. So hopefully we will have all the miscellaneous technical problems taken care of by next week. So, Dan, do you have any videos coming up that you would like to pimp before we go?
Well, no, but please check the CSRs. I am doing the CSRs. I'm not voting in the CSRs. I recuse my vote for the CSRs. Okay, I don't vote for the CSRs, but I will be physically making the CSR. So please, November 11th, Veterans Day in America. Here we call it Remembrance Day in America, but North and South America, whatever. That, you know what I'm saying. USA and Canada. November 11th, the CSRs are coming out. And other than that, 11th. Subscribe to my show every Saturday.
Tune in here on November 12th to see me going bananas. So we will have that discussion when it comes up. So I've got unboxing video tomorrow. Tomorrow's unboxing is ASL Action Pack number 17 from the ASL Oktoberfest. Friday, we have a special Inside the Box video coming because I got too much stuff that I bought and I got to get the videos out. And then Monday, we got the counter clipping stream at 8:30 p.m. 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So, all right, everybody,
Artie,
thanks.
Wait, Artie, can you give us a close up of your eyeball?
You can't. You're not really going to see it, to be honest. This is. I'll take the glasses off, but you're really. It does not show up on camera very well.
No, I see a red spot. I see a red spot.
Oh, yeah.
There.
It's just a scab. It's a very small cut.
Is that where they jab the needles to freeze your eye?
The cut's smaller than the cyst they pulled out, actually. Yeah, I got four shots of Novocaine in the eye. That sucked bad. So I have no desire to repeat that experience anytime soon. It sucked. And then, of course, they're standing over you with your, with the scalpel millimeters from your eye, and you got to sit still like this. They didn't knock me out for this nonsense or anything like that.
Oh my God.
All right, I had to sit there awake for it. It sucked. I was vibrating on the way. I had just sit in the car for 10 minutes and just cool off because it was stressful. Holy cow. So anyway, oh yeah, it was super minor. I had a cyst under my eye. They're checking it, but they don't think it's a problem. So it's gone. And you couldn't. It's like I said, it's hard for it to show up on camera. But you could see it in person, and to me, at least, it was super. I mean, it was occluding my vision. It was that big, so I'm glad it's gone. Hope it doesn't come back. Holy shit!
Did they let you keep it?
No. I didn't even ask to see it. I was curious to see it, but they sent it to Tox for biopsy.
Yeah, maybe there was a tooth in there with an extra testicle or something.
God, you're making it worse. All right, everybody. Thanks so much. Everybody have a great night.
Have a good night.